dating. It's not like we had a lunch date that was broken, but
Right.
but he really never would. He wouldn't talk to me that summer at all.
Okay. We see an attorney meeting with him, telling him, hey, sign this paper so you can visit Lisa. And he's still denying at this point that Lisa is his child.
Yeah, probably.
Do you remember when he admitted that she was actually his? Was he like many,
I
many
remember
years later?
when he started really spending time with her, and
Yeah?
he introduced her to me and stuff. That was in 1986. So
Okay.
that was quite a bit
Quite a
later.
ways, yeah.
When she was 8.
But yeah, when she was 8.
And he's meeting with different attorneys, and they're discussing stock options. And Steve Jobs is saying all these people, they don't deserve stock options. All these early founders. So there's you, there was Chris Espinosa, there was Randy Wigington, a bunch of guys he said don't deserve
The Houstons.
stocks.
The guys from the garage.
Yeah. And now the movie shows you complaining to Steve Jobs about that, but they missed the most important detail of that whole
They
thing.
showed me complaining?
They showed you complaining to Steve, saying, "Hey, it's not fair that you guys you didn't give these guys, stock. They were here. They made the company."
Oh, I didn't
with us."
remember that being in the movie. Huh.
But what they missed was what you did for the people who didn't get stock. And why don't you tell the story of what you did for those people?
Well, I took some of those people that had been in the garage in the early days, and I figured I wouldn't have had a reason to do what had gotten me my great wealth if it hadn't been for them. And why do a few people at the top claim the wealth when we wouldn't have even started the company without the others beside us? They were our friends, and you don't desert them.
Right.
So I gave large amounts of stock to at least some, I forget 5 or 6 of them, that had been there right from the start. And then I did another program to sell a lot of my stock, rather than to some big investor, to sell it at pre-IPO prices so everybody could make sort of the money the house is worth. So all the engineers and marketing people in the company signed up for a WAS plan. The lawyer, had to approve them all as sophisticated investors or something because we weren't public.
Right.
And somehow one day they said, okay, we've approved it. Allies and Stat approved it. I was shocked. And we went ahead with that plan too, but it helped a lot of the people in the company, because I came from Hewlett-Packard and they gave us stock profit sharing checks every quarter and said that's to give it a stock and to make you feel like an owner of your company.
So how many people you think you helped out with the WAS plan?
I don't
I
know,
was
40,
one of them.
80?
You one
No,
of them?
the
Yeah,
WAS
I was one
plan.
of
The
them.
WAS plan was pretty much all the engineers.
Yeah,
pretty much.
Yeah, it might have been 80
there
people.
There was some bad things though, because to buy that stock cost $10,000. It was going to be worth hundreds of thousands, but you still had to do it, and a lot of people.
I limited the amount each person could buy.
People
to be
didn't
fair.
understand how valuable it would be, some of them, so there were a few people who went around saying, oh, I'll give you the money to buy it, but it's really for me. One guy, Paul Wyman,
made a
in
lot. I
particular,
know. Some of them made a lot.
He made over $1 million by buying up 10 people's shares for himself. And there were a few others like that too. Who was, I'm trying to think of their names.
I never heard
Well,
that.
they didn't want it. I don't care. That's going to happen. But I helped a lot of people. But
That was
the ones from the early days, I
remarkably-
helped them all out with a very large amount. I don't want to say
Including
that.
Daniel, right?
I think so.
Remarkably generous gesture was.
Thank you.
No, and no,
But
and
I
so-
do what's right, and then I don't have to go my life remembering who did I do it. What was the
Help
amount?
everybody.
I don't.
You don't have to worry about who it was.
So now we're on this subject. So
By the way, the guy who played me in the movie, Josh Gad, wanted them to put that scene in it
Oh, he did.
really,
of me doing
'Cause
that,
he knew
and they denied it. Yeah.
Oh wow, bastards.
well,
My views are not the views of KMVT television or the cities of
but so it has to be said the letter that I got from you, or maybe it was your father, or right, the letter that you were going to give me a modest gift, right? That was like 1982, and then or 81. You had
No, it
your
was right before. It was before the
just
IPO.
before
That
just
was 80,
before the
December
plane
80.
crash.
Yeah.
And then years went by, and I left Apple in '84, and that gift didn't even happen till '85. So yeah, well,
Doesn't make any sense to me at all.
because you had amnesia, don't you? Do you remember?
No,
Anyway.
No, but
doesn't remember crashing
he
his
gave
plane.
those shares before the IPO. That was the point. They were pre-IPO stock, and the IPO was December '80.
I think so. Some other screw up in your case.
Something went wrong.
Oh, maybe.
I really
I don't
do.
know.
I
I don't know.
really
All I
do.
know is I didn't get that gift from you till 1985.
Something
It
really
was
wrong
after I
about
had already
that.
left Apple.
Because
No,
I
but
wasn't even thinking about it by then. I
Anyway.
assumed I had done it.
It made a big difference in my life. Thank you so much.
So the movie shows you quitting on IPO day, but that wasn't the case at all.
No,
not at
he
all.
worked on the Mac.
You worked on Mac and everything until like 85, you said?
Yeah.
You worked at Apple?
Late 84, yeah.
84, okay. So,
Well, you know, it's a movie, so they had to cram everything into 90 minutes
right.
and simplify things. And,
so the movie jumps to 1982, and I think this is when...
No, it's not 82, 81, I think. I mean, that was when the Mac stuff.
Mac started in January of 81.
That's when
Right?
Steve took it
Yeah.
over. Steve took over the Mac in
Oh,
January
And
81.
I was working on the
Okay.
Mac project actually at that time, but then I had a plane crash
Yeah.
in Feb of
So that scene where
81.
Steve
Right.
confronts Jeff Raskin, that's like
Okay, well...
December
that was-
80 or January 81.
It says here that we, first, before that happens, Steve's working on the Lisa project.
Right?
And the board tells him, hey man, this is losing lots of money.
Sure, that happened in 1980.
That was in
Yeah.
80 still. Okay,
Yeah.
1980. The company is hemorrhaging money because Steve's spending all this money on the Lisa.
That's not true.
No,
the
no,
Apple
no.
the Apple II was
Making
doing
huge amounts of
incredibly
money.
well.
Oh, so you weren't losing money yet.
The Lisa
No.
was a big loser, but
Not yet.
Not yet.
it was a
gonna be
failure.
loser.
It was a failure. Yeah, it was a failure. The money going into it, the millions going into it, weren't going to get returned. It was going to cost $20,000 of today's money,
today's
10,000 of those money. But that's because of the amount of memory it took to do a machine the right way with proper architecture of the hardware and the operating system. That's what it took. And Steve didn't have the experience and know-how to realize that's what it took to do the machine the right way. And he said, we got to make a cheap machine to get back at them. That's what he did with the Macintosh, and cut down a lot, made it a single user, run one program type thinking from the start, and it hurt things a lot.
So Steve got fired from the Lisa, and then he got to work on the Mac, which is already in progress.
Sure, but the way the movie
No.
told that was preposterous.
Oh yeah?
And I mean, like Steve didn't even know Bill Atkinson, until it had like Markla telling him about the Mac. But of course, he knew Jeff. He knew all that
Yeah.
stuff
Oh.
going on.
Yeah. He didn't just find out about it. Mark Markla didn't
like
say, there's this project
Yeah.
for you. No.
Oh.
He knew about it. He even
No, what it
called me at
really
the
was
time.
Jeff's Macintosh was 6809 based,
Right.
and that didn't really have a future. But then Burl figured out this amazing trick that allowed him to hook up the 68000, which had a 16-bit data bus with only 8 memory chips. And so it could be really inexpensive.
I'm going to
And
nod
that's-
like I know what that
And then
means.
that's when Steve got interested. The movie has Steve telling the Mac team to use the 68,000, but that didn't happen. It didn't happen that way.
Right. It shows Bill Atkinson, Burrell, Jeff Raskin, and Chris Espinosa working on the
Yeah,
Mac.
and that's wrong. I mean, Chris was back at UC Berkeley. Chris wasn't there at the time. Steve later talked Chris into dropping out of Berkeley.
When Chris went to Berkeley, this is what I heard, Steve Jobs advised him, be sure to try LSD while you're there. It's great.
I didn't hear that,
I heard this story.
although I knew Chris had told him.
I could believe it.
So then we see, hold on here. So I got
Steve
a...
never told me that.
So Jeff Raskin and Steve Jobs get off on a bad start in the movie. I don't know if that's,
No, I don't. I don't think they got off to a bad start at all. But it was like 1982 when
no.
Jeff wrote a letter to the board.
No, before that. That was 1981. When
late
Steve,
81. Late 81.
Steve
Yeah.
Burrell put the 68,000 in the Mac at the very beginning of 1981. That really the end of 1980 was when he was working on it. Steve got really interested then. Jeff was against the 68,000. He thought that would make the machine too expensive. Lisa was paying like $40 or $50 for it, and that was beyond.
My whole thing is, how do you get the disc out?
Yeah, and then Steve started hanging around, and then Jeff got very upset that Steve was kind of usurping. He was telling Burl what to do. Jeff had particular software ideas that Steve didn't like. Steve's idea was to take all the software Bill Atkinson wrote for the Lisa and run that on the Mac. That wasn't Jeff's idea, and so there was a lot of tension.
So there's a scene where Jobs goes off recruiting for the Mac. And I actually have, we got a question from Adam Rosen of the Cult of Mac website. He says, if I recall correctly, the movie portrays Steve Jobs asking Andy Hertzfeld, "Are you good?" And you answered, "I think so." And Jobs drafts him for the Mac team. And then you said, "What's a Macintosh?"
No, that's confused. Bill, it was Bill Fernandez in the movie, in this fictional movie. He asked Bill Fernandez first. They had the Bill Fernandez character say, "What's a Macintosh?" That's all wrong because Bill Fernandez was in Japan at the time. He wasn't around.
Right.
He didn't start on the Mac till 9 months
no
later.
wonder.
And so they just threw that in, I guess, because they thought it was funny.
Nobody in the company would have said, "What's a Macintosh?" Anyway.
Right.
We all knew what was.
So you
that
tell a
project.
funny story in the book, Revolution in the Valley, about how you were working on an Apple II and then Steve recruited you. How did that go?
Right. Well, they used you already told that story. That's why. Well, it was a little different because the opportunity for me I was helping Burl with the Mac a little bit on the side anyway. But the real opportunity was they fired all the engineering managers in the Apple II group just one day. Mike Scott decided to, in February 1981, they fired 3 of the 4 engineering managers. I came into work.
There weren't a lot of
it
them.
was just chaos, No one knew who was going to be fired next. Everyone, Scotty was firing people one by one, and people
Well,
were
the way that it happened was Scotty actually went to the lab manager, Tom Whitney, and told him, "Take a 2-week vacation."
Yes.
Really?
And while he was gone, he went around and talked to everybody and figured out who were the slackers, and there always are some. And
were
pretty
quite a
much
few.
he fired a whole ton of people, not just managers.
Yes.
Because I thought Bill Thomas was left as a software manager.
Yeah.
I thought he
Yeah,
stayed.
was he on the
I don't
Apple
think he
II?
got let go, but a lot
Ken
of people got
Victor
let go.
was the software
They got
manager
let
of the
go,
Cap.
and there may have been some mistakes in that quick of a process, and eventually it drew the ire of other people in Apple and the board, and Mike Scott was
But
eventually
I
laid off, our president
I
from day
told
one.
people I was going to quit because they fired a few people I thought were great, and I was pretty upset about it.
Bob Bishop should not have
and
been
then-
fired.
Yeah, Bob Bishop was fired. And
Was he?
Rick
I
Ricci-
didn't know that.
Yeah, he was fired in that.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Now I feel bad.
Yes. And word got back to Mike Scott, who had done the firing, that I was going to quit, and he didn't want me to quit, so he called me into his office and he goes, "Well, what could make you stay?" And I said, "Well, if I could work on the Mac with Burl and Bud." And then that's when Steve came by. It was kind of not, it wasn't
Okay.
like Steve's idea.
Steve was walking
for
randomly
that.
down the halls, picking people.
Yeah, no.
But didn't he come to you and unplug your computer?
Yeah, he did. Well, I had gone to Mike Scott, and Scotty told him that I was interested in working on the Mac. So actually I had a meeting first in his office. I had to go to his office. That's where he asked me, "Are you any good?" and stuff. And then after that, he went over to the little Mac building where Burl and Brian Howard were there, and he asked them, "Am I any good? Do you want that?" And then I guess he got positive response enough. Then he came to my desk.
But I thought you were working on the Macintosh before I was.
Before
all this.
Just about the same.
Before Steve took it over.
No,
Yeah, I wasn't there long. I wasn't there long
Yeah,
before my
yeah,
plane
yeah,
crashed.
yeah, yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, no, I remember you had a party at your house the weekend right before the plane crash, like on a Friday night, and the plane crash was a Saturday. And at that party, Burl and Bud were both there, who were working on the Mac. And I was talking to them about working on the Mac at that party. It was like your engagement party. You had taken a trip with Candy, like around the world, and you were showing slides of it to everyone at that party, and that was just before the plane crash.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so when the day finally came for you to go to the Mac, did Steve come in and fetch you?
Yes, yeah. And so after I had talked to Scotty, he came by my desk, and he said, "You're working on the Mac now," and I said, "Well, I got to finish. I had just started this new operating system for the Apple II called DOS 4.0 that they had asked me to do." And I wanted to say, of course I couldn't finish it, but I wanted to get it in good enough shape that someone else could take it over. And Steve said, "Are you kidding? The Apple II's obsolete. The Apple II's going to be dead. You got to work on the Mac." And I said, "Just let me finish it up." So he unplugged my computer, carried it away, and so I had no choice to go after him. And then the funniest thing is he took me to the Mac building, plopped it down on the desk. "This is your desk," and then he left. and I noticed the desk wasn't unoccupied. So there was all the drawers were full of stuff, and it turned out it was Jeff Raskin's desk, who he had just kicked out like the day before.
Oh, so you had missed.
So
Jeff
so
Raskin.
I got Jeff had he had cameras and model airplanes and radio controlled cars in the drawers of the desk.
Now, how did you get on the Mac team?
Well, this part must have been in my plane crash because I had amnesia for 5 weeks. But how did I get on? Turns out that my favorite people in the company were working there, and I could have sworn that Andy was already there, and Burl, and Jeff Raskin, the people that I thought the most of for their creative intellect. As creative people who really could do great things. Burl had been just a technician who never went to college, studied, my Apple II designs, and he started designing little computers of his own, that simple and tight with as few parts. So he was definitely my equal in that regard. And I just admired these people. I wanted to be a part of this
There
project.
was a little Mac team.
I want to be around those people.
Of exactly 5 people before Steve got involved. They were Jeff Raskin, Brian Howard, Bud Tribble, Burl Smith, and Joanna Hoffman. 5 people. And then as soon as Steve really invested himself in it and took it over, he tried to get he got Woz and Rod Holt and Randy Wigington. The early Apple crew, he asked them all.
And he invited me to come.
Yeah, and Dan.
Yes.
And so
jumped at the
Dan,
chance.
so that's when you were working on it. But then the plane crash happened.
At the height of the Mac development, how many people did you have working on it?
At the
and
height,
hardware?
well, it depends where you define the height.
There was
the biggest
for
number
the
of people.
original Mac. Steve promised us when there were about 50 people in the end of 1982 or mid 1982, he promised us the Mac team would never have more than 100 people.
Right.
He tried to do that until we got up close. But so the concept was the Mac team would have 100 people at most, and that's about how many it had at the time it launched.
So that's by today's standards, that's pretty small.
Yes.
I think,
we thought that was
I don't know,
pretty big.
every product of every company takes kind of some small group starting.
Yeah, because Mac OS 10, is just software, and there's thousands of people on that.
Sure. But it was a lot simpler. I mean, just the whole operating system was 64 bytes.
When it was done, did Steve Jobs really call it insanely great?
Yeah, well, that was one of Steve's phrases. He called
Yeah.
it that. Not when it was done,
No,
but
before.
during the whole time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But now the board is complaining that the Mac is going to cost too much money, and it's running late.
It wasn't really the board. Oh, one thing about that movie that I
Totally
thought was
inaccurate.
just completely wrong was the role of Arthur Rock. That movie
Totally.
cast Arthur Rock as the big villain who chased Steve out and all that. There was nothing like that. And well, the other thing was the movie wrote out Scotty. Scotty was not a character in the movie, and he was like
President from the day we started till we went public.
Yeah. He was a huge force there, and so they took some of what Scotty did and they made Arthur Rock do it.
Okay.
Sort of as Steve's nemesis, the person who told Steve he couldn't work on Lisa, etc. I don't know why they did that.
I really like the actor for
They
Arthur
didn't.
Rock.
They didn't really show anywhere near the reality of the
Yeah.
reason that Steve had to be
Yes.
let go from Macintosh. They didn't come close to touching on what the real situation was.
So, what was the real situation?
The real situation was that the Mac failed terribly, totally. We had built a factory to build 50,000 of them. We were selling 500 a month. Steve had canceled projects because they could only sell 2,000 a month. Don't even go bother designing that one. And so it was that bad. And I think he was taking it real hard that he failed for a third computer he'd tried to create. And his vision didn't include the ability to understand you have to build a market. It's going to take time. You aren't going to sell 50,000 on day one. And meanwhile, we had to save the company. Steve wanted to totally cancel and basically kill off the Apple II. And one thing that he did was the Apple II wanted to use this new Sony floppy disk that everybody in the world was going to use. It was so great. And the Macintosh and Sony said they were told by Steve Jobs they weren't allowed to sell it the double-sided version because Macintosh would only have the single-sided. See, Steve didn't want the competition. He wanted to by pushing the Apple II down, he'd have less competition for the Mac. But the Apple II was our only revenues in the company. It had been 7 years, and it was still going to be 3 more years that was our only profits running the company. We needed to revive the Apple II, keep it going for a few more years, and build a Macintosh market. And the way we built it was by sending sales reps all over the country to businesses, to universities, to software developers, getting everything we could to build the market. And when we finally did, it supplanted the Apple II market at the same level. but it was going to take time, and Steve didn't have the patience and wanted to basically give up the company to go with to try to put everything into the Mac 2, which wasn't ready for sales yet. So it didn't have enough of a computer for the right price yet.
I tell that story a little bit differently in that the Mac did sell a lot of units initially because of its novelty, because of its positive qualities. In June of 1984, it sold over 60,000 units. So they upped the forecast because Christmas was the big time, and they thought they'd sell like 80,000 units. They built 80,000 units to sell in December, and they only sold like 1,000 units or something like that. It really fell off. They had a big boost from the first school, the back to school season there. So in like September and October, it did okay because a lot of students, they had a special program for the university consortium. But then in November is when it really fell off. I was already on leave of absence. But I was still friends with everyone.
The problem is you got to save the company first, and everyone believed in the Macintosh. I believed in it so strongly, and John Scully did. Everyone in there believed in the Macintosh as the future. It's just the execution steps.
There was this thing called the Mac Office, the Macintosh Office that you left out there. But because when the Macs weren't selling, a major mistake they made was trying to focus it on the office market. And that's when, for the big introduction in January 1985, we had the great commercial, the 1984 commercial for January 84. They made this commercial called Lemmings for 1985 that portrayed Apple's customers as lemmings walking off a cliff. Or the IBM people.
Sorry.
But that was generally considered a disaster. And the whole Macintosh Office thing never really even got developed. They had some bad ideas. The Mac needed a hard disk. That was really the biggest single design mistake that we made, was not putting in a high enough bandwidth way to get a internal hard disk integrated.
And meanwhile, Lisa had a hard drive.
Patience. Don't put out a machine when it's not a good enough machine for the price you're selling this year. Work on it, put it out when it is a good enough machine to sell at the price you're offering.
And part of that with the price was they tacked on an extra $500 at the very end.
By the way, what made the Macintosh finally go was a bunch of people that Steve disdained, led by John Scully, who went out and did all those marketing steps I told about to build the Mac market. They believed in it, but they also opened it up and made color versions. They did those things were very important too in the Mac revival.
But the thing that really saved it was
Steve would have never done that.
PageMaker,
Laser writer.
The desktop publishing industry, which was about the time the Mac Plus came. The Mac didn't have enough RAM, and we knew that. But we wanted to get the price down. But with the 512K, it kind of began to have enough RAM.
RAM prices come down.
Yes.
So eventually the Macintosh had enough RAM. The Lisa was the right machine with the right amount of RAM. It was the wrong year for pricing.
Right.
And we finally got the Lisa back when we got OS 10, actually, is what I like to say. But finally, the Macintosh had 1 megabyte of RAM, and what did PCs have? 1/8 of a megabyte. So when programs like desktop publishing and Photoshop came out, they had no choice. Only one machine had what they needed.
Right.
So
they had 640K. So more than
in the movie, Steve Jobs blamed the board and John Scully because he thought they priced it too high. And he wanted the price to be lower.
That's partially true. Steve, till his dying day, blamed John Scully for pricing it too high.
We asked John Scully to come on the show or send us a message, and he said, I live in Florida. Wait, no, he said more. Actually, he wrote it all down here. He said, you have some great guys to give you the facts. Unfortunately, I live in Florida, not Silicon Valley. John Scully.
We could have Skyped him.
So I was saying earlier, John was in an interview just this month, and he said very kind things about Steve.
Yeah.
He said he really didn't think it was necessary for Steve to leave, but Steve was really stubborn and headstrong, and wanted to be in charge. And,
the problem is Steve didn't have the patience and the maturity as when he returned. And other people ran companies before, like John Scully did, and they knew what it would take. And the trouble is, Steve wanted to go in ways that they felt would not work.
So around this time, was Apple going to announce a loss because the Mac wasn't selling?
Right. At the time they announced Steve was stepping down, they announced the loss simultaneously. That was May 31st, 1985.
So The movie shows
And stock went down quite a bit too.
the movie shows Steve trying to figure out how to sell it for less, and then you walk in the room, and that's when you resign from Apple. It's late at night. You walk in the room, and you say, "It's not fun anymore, so I don't want to be here, and we don't talk anymore. You and I grew apart." Now that's not all how it happened, right?
Well, I left when I had a plane crash.
Yeah.
I came out of amnesia, and I realized that the best people, in my opinion, in the world were on the Macintosh team, and I wasn't critical to it to have a success. And I told Steve that I'm going to go back to school and get my degree. Well, that's not telling him I don't like things. Now, in 1985 or so, I got this idea to start a company to build the first universal remote control. And people who know me know that I always love to see the new technologies, you know, and here I was still young enough to be a part of making one. And got this idea. I got an engineer interested in it with me, so I left to build that project. At the same time, we had a board meeting just before I was going to leave, after I'd made presentations to Apple employees, Apple executives on blackboards showing them what I was going to do, so they wouldn't think like I'm ditching out secretly to have another company on the side. They kept me on the payroll. They kept me an Apple employee under an employment contract, you know, and wished me very well and said I was doing nothing competitive with Apple. But the Wall Street Journal called, and I mentioned that I was a little upset because we just had a shareholders meeting. At the shareholders meeting, the Apple II wasn't mentioned one time. And I called John Scully, and I was screaming that at him. He said it was mentioned one time.